not too exciting, huh? Come on, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. I think it will be. Yeah. We're going to get started, and I don't know how much material Bob has, but we've got 130 years of St. Paul to summarize. I thought I would first... Is it back on? Okay. It might not be. I'll try to get this closer. Welcome. This was really designed for some of our new folk that have been joining us, and then as it turns out, they couldn't make it. But it's a two-part series, so they will hopefully be here next week as well to hear kind of your invitations to ministries. So does anyone have any questions about next week? Next week will be same kind of a gathering, very informal, but you get about 2, depending on how many of us show up, and ministries are represented, 2 to 3 minutes to kind of, tell people, share about your ministry that you're passionate about, and how people can get involved. I think those are the 2 best topics, if you will, but it will go with questions too. So, any questions for next week? Invite others to stay. It's a little mini fair. All right, well, my task when Bob and I were planning this was to give an overview of church history, which, oh my goodness, of course I have a big, a bunch of books, and there are a lot of things that I don't remember. I'd have to refresh my own memory. So I went looking for videos, and I found a sweet little video. It's only 10 minutes long, which I think kind of in a nutshell, and then hopefully we can get some conversation started on that too. But before we do that, I told Alicia that I would use these. She made them for a council, I think the Christmas party. And so you guys, Nancy, you might want to come in a little bit to partner up. You could do it groups of 3 if we have an unusual or an odd number. But you guys are in 2. So I'm going to give each group, I'm going to give each group, do you remember these little old things from school?
Yeah. I love you, I don't love you.
Well, it doesn't have that kind of material in there, but it has some stuff to get to know one another. So you guys can do it in 3s. Or no, Nancy, you and I can do it together. Or you could pick. So the thing is, you have, each one of us will do it one or 2 times. So whoever's got the doohickey, I forget what they're called, asks your partner to pick one of the words, faith, hope, love, and joy. So if it's joy, you do 3 times, J-O-Y. So then you end up with numbers inside, and you ask that person to pick a number. I'm going to pick 2. 1, 2. You can do it. You just do it through your fingers. You can do it. Put your fingers up inside. You use 2 hands. Use your thumb and your forefinger. You can master it. I know you can. You can do it with 1 hand. Look at that. That's impressive. Okay. Okay, so then you pick it, and then if somebody picks number 3 in this particular series, you ask them the question. It's as simple as that, and you have a little conversation and get to know. I see some perplexity. It's just the way, you're all about relationship. You're like, build relationships, so that's what we're doing right here. So, oh yeah, so we can do that. Here, you can pair up with Deborah, how's that? Yeah, so we're going to do just a little icebreaker with one another. So Matthews needs a partner over here. Yeah, okay. And then if you want, we'll just spend the next 5 minutes or so. I'll just kind of count down, and we can share out some interesting facts. No, share out.
Calm down. Oh, I heard you say you were going to calm down.
No, it's exciting stuff. So there you go. All right. Okay, so are there any questions? I don't see any perplexing faces anymore. You guys are already going. Oh, sorry. Here you go.
Is this the last one?
Nope, there's a whole stack over here somewhere. I put them down somewhere. Yeah. Okay. And for those who might be tuning in, this might be a hard project to do, but we'll. All right, I'll just give you a minute or so to wrap up your conversations. All right, let's wrap up those conversations. Okay, we just got going here. Nancy just got going here. It's hard to stop. Yeah. We have so much to catch up on, right? So I gave Ivan a little hard time, so he gave me a little hard time back. We do have a lot of ground to make up, if you will, relationship-wise. COVID was hard on us. It was hard on everyone, and hard on faith communities, I think, especially, because that's what we rely upon, is getting together and seeing faces and being with one another. So this was just a start. And I know those of you who know each other, you can dig deeper each time you get together, and it's intentional about how we gather together. But the topic at hand today was not so much relationship building, but it's everything that we do is about building relationships, what we do together. So I will say that. Church history, I thought would be a great place to start as we connect with new members, not knowing what their background is, and none of you are technically new members. How long has each of you been here at St. Paul-ish? How long have you been here? Since 81. How many years is that?
41.
Okay, 41. Others, it's not a competition, same, okay? Yeah. 15 to 18. And Bob, you have, you were baptized here? Or not necessarily in this? 1949. Wow, that's awesome. So.
Mine is 30 and Holy Cross.
Okay. Yeah, Jim came on board, as did Susan and Marty and, no. So wait, I'm confusing. Were you welcomed in on Zoom? Yes, you, Susan, Marty, and Walter Alston were welcomed via Zoom. Was it just last year? It was probably about a year ago, I think. Yeah. And I know that was hard because we weren't all doing communion via Zoom, but that was the best way to, and Ruth Hoffman. I knew there was one more that joined at that time. And so new to us, obviously, is Deborah. Yay. So Deborah was a member here before and is back with us wearing two hats. Office coordinator, which I'm very thankful. Have I told you lately how thankful I am for your presence? So thankful for her presence in the office. And she also occasionally puts on her just membership, being a part of the community hat. So today she provided goodies and is helping to coordinate. We're going to try to do it all in one day. Clean up inside, what we typically do here before Easter, and outside. So you'll have to make a choice when you come. But just come for a couple of hours and either work inside or outside or both. I'm springing for pizza and salad, I guess. So that is a few weeks away. It's in the bulletin. The Saturday before Palm Sunday. It is Palm Sunday. The day before. So it's the 9th? Okay. I don't have a calendar in front of me, so it is on our calendar, and I think there's two different announcements in the bulletin. The 9th, that's what I thought. Okay, you thought. So, okay, yeah, Jim.
I just want to say I've been associated in terms of knowing people here and had several of your youth on my soccer team.
Oh, wow. It's a small world. Oh, Larry Wright, and that's cool. Okay, that's the networking of relationships that you don't know how you touch someone's life and how you're connected. So that's cool. All right, without further ado, I'm going to show you this little ditty on church history, and we can stop or hold your question. It's only 10 minutes long, so if there are other things that we can make a conversational style, that's great. Or we can move on, and Bob can give us. I'm anxious to learn more about St. Paul. I know I've read some of your history, anniversary documents, but it's always good to hear some of the stories that are part of it too. So, all right. Well, before we start the video. What are some of the, can we maybe name some of what you think are the big milestones in Christianity? That's maybe a fun, make you work. I'm going to make you work a little bit without studying. So let's try to think way back in Christianity, okay, Reformation. Can we go further back?
Let's start with Christ.
Oh, there you go. That's good. That's a good place for us Christians to start. The Crusades. The video is going to talk a little bit about that. Constantine and that weirdness of separation of church and state, right? That wasn't happening way back then, right? It was all power and religion were all mashed together in ugly ways. And they still are in some ways, but maybe a little more covertly. The apostles. Yeah, look at that. So apostles and disciples.
The Great Schism of
1046. I think that only because I watched the video did I remember that number again. We should, yeah, that great split between the East and Western Church. And Deborah has shared with me a journal article talking about the Orthodox Russian Church and the culture behind that. And as odd as we think maybe another culture is, it's so ingrained, right, in what's happening around the world. So even if we don't agree with how that culture is, it is what it is, right? So that separation of, or the split off, the Great Schism, and probably the second Great Schism is the Reformation, and then all the splintering after that. Ooh, two popes. Yeah, yeah. What time frame was that? I don't know if it talks about that here.
First was in the late 18th century, and then the second was immediately pre-Civil War.
Okay. Yeah, because I think of that as that, in my age time frame, that's what I think of as was the North and the South, and most denominations that were around at that time had a split, right? Which is why we have some of our more conservative and more liberal branches of the same, a name, like Methodist or Presbyterian or Lutheran. And there was this, at least in the Presbyterian church, that split because of North and South made their own things. So we'll know that church history is not detached, right, from world events. I mean, it's all mashed together. So let's watch this and see if there's some more questions or insights. I'm sorry that I'll try to put the microphone. I should have grabbed a microphone. We'll see how loud it comes. Oh, you have one. Can I put that on there? That'll be helpful. Thank you.
You are mic'd.
I'm mic'd, but I'm going to put it by the speaker on here to pick up better. Yeah, I got it. I got it. Okay.
Right, so what you need to know is how we get from Jesus here to the great big church, all the great big churches we have today. No problem. So, Jesus Christ,
Really working.
parables, miracles, love your enemies, death and resurrection, amazing.
Didn't really help.
Lots of followers or disciples, but these 12 guys were specially chosen by Jesus, and he made Peter their leader. When Jesus went up to heaven, this lot, well, one was replaced, and another story. This lot continued to spread Jesus' teaching, but not everyone was happy about it. The Romans, for a start, who'd already crucified Jesus and felt that should have been an end to it. And the Jewish authorities employed people like Saul here to stamp out the new religion. But then Saul had a vision and heard Jesus. Why are you giving me a hard time? What's your problem? So Saul changed his name to Paul and spent the rest of his life spreading the new religion instead. Paul and Peter and the rest of the 12 are known as the Apostles, which is Greek for messengers. The people who believed the Apostles' message began to meet together, and someone in Antioch came up with a nickname for them, Christians, because they followed Christ. Paul and Peter and a few others wrote letters to these groups of Christians, called churches, and you can read some of them in the Bible. Around about now, the first book about Jesus' life was written. It's called Mark, and you can read that in the Bible too. In the following 50 years or so, the books of Matthew, Luke, and John appeared, all with a slightly different take on Jesus' life. Most Christians believe that Peter became the very first bishop of Rome, a dangerous place to be. Fire destroyed most of the city, and rumours spread that the Emperor Nero had started it to clear the land for a massive palace. He needed someone else to blame, so he picked on the Christians. No one liked Christians. Everyone thought they were superstitious because they didn't follow the Roman religion, or even the Jewish one. They were probably criminals because their leader, Jesus, had been executed. And they were cannibals because they ate bodies and drank blood. They didn't. It was the bread and wine of the Lord's Supper, of course. All a misunderstanding, but the upshot was that thousands of Christians were persecuted and killed. Nero used them as human candles, and many more met gory deaths in the circus. Not that kind of circus, that kind of circus. Peter and Paul were probably executed around now. The story goes that Peter was crucified upside down and Paul was beheaded. The other apostles were all killed too, apart from John, who was the only one to die of old age. But Christianity continued to grow. The churches were run by bishops, and the first ones, along with other Christian thinkers of the time, are known as the Church Fathers. Most of them were killed as well. Right from the start, Christians argued about what to believe and how to behave. One of the Church Fathers, a man called Origen, even castrated himself because he wanted to live a pure life. But it didn't catch on. In Britain, Christianity probably arrived with Roman converts trying to escape the persecution. Some hope. One of the first British Christians we know about, a man called Alban, was beheaded for being a Christian. Then a general in the Roman army called Constantine became emperor, and he'd recently converted to Christianity. Or so he said. His story was that he'd had a vision of a Christian symbol called the Chi Rho, the first two letters of Christ in Greek. He heard the words, "By this sign, conquer," so he got his soldiers to paint it on their shields, beat anyone who fancied a fight, and became emperor. But his conversion might have been a crafty political move. Constantine wanted everyone to work together, but the Roman religion got in the way because different people worshipped different gods. He saw Christianity, a religion in which everyone worshipped the same god, as a good way to unite the empire. Little did he know how things would turn out. Constantine passed a law that allowed Christians freedom to worship without persecution. This meant that the bishops could get together to decide exactly what they all believed. They drew up the first draft of the Nicene Creed, a statement of their beliefs that churches still use today. This big bishopy get-together was called an Ecumenical Council, and there were 7 in all because the arguments went on and on, mainly about Jesus. Some people believed he was just a man, some people believed he was God and had disguised himself as a man, some people believed he was two beings, God and man in one body. The councils eventually decided that Jesus was totally God and totally man at the same time. Christianity was made the Roman Empire's official religion by the Emperor Theodosius, who also split the empire in two. And despite the bishop's efforts to keep everyone together, the church was beginning to split up as well. The Nestorians left at the Council of Ephesus because they believed that Jesus was just a man and God's Spirit had come to live inside him. More people, known today as the Oriental Orthodox churches, left at the Council of Chalcedon. They didn't like the council's description of Jesus, of one substance with the Father and at the same time of one substance with man, because they thought it sounded too much like what the Nestorians had said. They also didn't like how powerful the Bishop of Rome was becoming. For a long time now, the Bishop of Rome, also called the Pope, had been gaining power, partly because he'd inherited the authority of the Apostle Peter, but mainly because those guys in Rome were really good at organising everyone. The Western Church and the Eastern Church were slowly drifting apart. They just didn't talk anymore. Most people in the West spoke Latin, and most people in the East spoke Greek, and the East didn't like having to do what the Pope said all the time, and then the West added some words to the Nicene Creed without asking the East. They were living separate lives. For a while, the Eastern Church was more powerful than the West, which had to cope with marauding Vandals, the fall of the Roman Empire, and the Dark Ages. By the time the West had sorted itself out, the East had challenges of its own as a new religion called Islam spread out from Arabia. In the West, Charlemagne was now ruling, well, most of it. He gave himself the title Holy Roman Emperor and got the Pope to crown him. This gave the Pope even more power, because from now on you can be emperor unless the Pope said so. Finally, it happened. The Great Schism. The church split in two, the Eastern Orthodox Church in the East, obviously, and the Roman Catholic Church in the West. The Roman Catholic Church became more and more powerful, while the Eastern Orthodox Church began to feel more and more squeezed out by the rise of Islam. This is where the Crusades come in. The Pope sent thousands of soldiers to the East to claim Jerusalem for Christianity, but the so-called Crusaders left a trail of destruction across Europe before they got anywhere near a battlefield. The Muslim leaders fought back, and over the next 150 years there were 6 more big crusades while the two sides struggled for control of the Holy Land. Eventually, the Crusaders gave up and went home. But the fact that the Pope now had the power to send soldiers to war shows that something somewhere had gone very wrong. Even your local priests were getting too big for their boots. Church services were in Latin, and the Bible had been translated into Latin, but by now only educated people like priests could understand Latin, so everyone else had to trust that what they said the Bible said was what the Bible really said. Some priests had seen an opportunity here, and had started to charge people to forgive their sins, placing themselves firmly between God and everyone else like holy bouncers. A professor at Oxford University called John Wycliffe argued that it was time for the church to clean up its act, to be reformed. He translated the Bible into English so that everyone could read it for themselves and make up their own minds. It didn't go down well with those in charge, and his Bibles were burned. It took a long time for an actual Reformation to kick off, but eventually a German priest called Martin Luther wrote a list of 95 theses, things he thought were wrong with the church, and nailed them to the door of an actual church in Wittenberg. The Pope sacked him, which Luther didn't mind because priests couldn't get married, and if he wasn't a priest anymore... A group of nuns had written him some fan mail, so he smuggled them out of their convent in herring barrels and married one of them after she'd had a long bath. The people who protested against the church and its teachings became known as Protestants. Other big names included John Calvin in France and Ulrich Zwingli in Switzerland. But they argued forever about what to believe instead, so very soon there were different groups of Protestants protesting. England remained officially Roman Catholic, and it was dangerous to be anything else. William Tyndale made himself so unpopular with his Protestant ideas that he had to leave the country. He translated the New Testament into English, and copies were smuggled back home to help Protestant feelings grow. Then King Henry VIII decided to marry Anne Boleyn, but he was already married to Catherine of Aragon. Divorce was out of the question back then, so Henry asked the Pope to annul his marriage instead, which would mean that the marriage had never been a real marriage in the first place. The Pope said no, but Henry had met a friendly English priest called Thomas Cranmer and made him Archbishop of Canterbury, so Thomas was more than happy to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine and marry him off to Anne. The Pope was very cross, so Henry left the Roman Catholic Church and made himself head of a new Church of England. The Roman Catholics realised they had to do something before everyone became a Protestant, and so the Counter-Reformation began. Catholic bishops got together for the Council of Trent, where they decided to keep their traditions, but made rules to stop priests conning people out of their hard-earned cash. The Church of England was still very like the Roman Catholic Church, just without the Pope. But when Henry died, his 9-year-old son became King Edward VI, and he allowed Thomas Cranmer to make the Church of England more Protestant. Cranmer wrote a list of 39 articles, which spelt out what the Church stood for, and stands for today, and wrote the Book of Common Prayer, which some churches still use. But the fiercely Roman Catholic Queen Mary I reunited England with the Pope, and had lots of Protestants burned at the stake, including our friend Thomas Cranmer, earning herself the nickname Bloody Mary. Then Mary died, Elizabeth I became Queen, and she made England Protestant again. Next came James I, who was the first monarch of England, Wales, Ireland, and Scotland. He was a big fan of Protestantism, and even published his own translation of the Bible. As European empires spread throughout the world, so did Christianity, and churches sent out missionaries to convert people in those hard-to-reach places. The Protestants continued to, protest, and there have been various offshoots over the years, from churches like the Quakers and Methodists, who have fairly mainstream beliefs, to groups like the Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, known as Mormons, and the Jehovah's Witnesses, who have more distinct beliefs of their own. In 1962, the Roman Catholic Church held a council, known as the Second Vatican Council, or Vatican II, which brought in some big changes. Church services, which had always been in Latin, were now to be in the language of the people. And so we continue to the present day, with churches of all different kinds all over the place. The Eastern Orthodox Church, the Oriental Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and ever-increasing numbers of Protestant churches, Lutherans, Calvinists, the Church of England, Methodists, Quakers, Baptists, Pentecostals. You have to wonder what Jesus would say about it all.
I couldn't have said it any better, any quicker. Thoughts, insights. It was a lot in 10 minutes. Yeah, I think so. You know, often, I think ever since I went to seminary 15 plus years ago, they're like, there was all the rumbles, the church is dying. And I'm like, God is too faithful, I think. The church will look different. It already does look different, even from then.
Apparently, they're still fighting over the same ground that the old church is falling.
Yeah, so the comment was we're still fighting over the same ground. Literally, land is a big issue. And it kind of glossed over the colonization, I think, a little too quickly, but it's a 10-minute video. And I know that we've had a lot more conversation to come on that. Deborah.
Well, I think one thing that speaks to me for the ELCA is the work that's been done for like joint communions and joint. There's a name for it. I can't think of it.
We full communion partners.
With the partners and stuff.
Yeah.
And the dialogues and everything.
Mm-hmm.
When that first started, that was just.
Yeah, so even though Lutherans are known, I mean, we were the first schism, although there were rumblings of Reformation well before Luther, but Luther is we markate him, if that's a word, as the big Protestant. But since then, the ELCA is pretty baby in its infant, like since we arose too, 86, 85, 80, somewhere around there, when the ELCA began. So that was a couple of other Lutheran bodies, the Lutheran Church in America, the American Lutheran Church, and there's a third one. No, the ALC, ELC. Well, that's what we've become. It wasn't that prior to. So it did a merger and separated and all kinds of stuff. But since then, we have nine full communion partners. Maybe we can try to list those. Ready? Go ahead. Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterian, USA. There's a difference, like ELCA and Missouri Synod. Okay, that's 3. United Church of Christ. Reformed Church. She's looking it up on her phone. Reformed Church. We got 3 more. Moravians, which there's not very many over in this area. We did say Episcopal. Who are we missing? Not Mennonite. Well, there should be, I'm sure there's more than that. Who are we missing? Now I'm embarrassed. Anyway, I'm pretty sure we have 9 full communion partners. And like you said, the conversations with the Roman Catholic Church have continued, as well as the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And there might be some others out there. Any other thoughts, insights? Perplexities?
Reading some really interesting and frightening stuff about the relationship between the Orthodox Church and the Russian government, especially with regard to Ukraine. It's still scary.
Yeah, so Bob, I should have given you the microphone. Bob was talking about, and that's exactly the article that Deborah had given me that got at some of that. And as I read it, it sounded much to me a little bit of our evangelical wing of Christianity and civil religion, if you will, that they're kind of married in a strange way. But yeah, so cultural stuff that's connected.
The church exists with the blessing of the government and vice versa?
Probably you mean in Russia and Ukraine? Yeah, there's a lot of strange bedfellows, I think, in there. Yeah. Kind of like, when the video talks about something went very awry when the Pope had the power to send people into battle, right? Something is very awry with the very basic Christian message to fight and kill, to make your point. So,
The schism, within the Anglican Church, the Episcopal and Anglican between Northern Europe and then all over the place, where the idea of, I guess we would call them more progressive policies, there's been a huge schism.
yeah. So big schism between, would you say, the Church of England and Anglican? The whole Protestant the name for that is really quite Protestant. We have a disagreement, and a group of us think that too, and then we kind of start all over it. And it's not like live and let live. It's like fight about it and kill about it. Like I just don't get it. Well, that kind of brings us up to where we're at in the U.S. Like I said, the ELCA started in the mid-'80s, so we're kind of babies in that way, but we have our roots back to that Reformation. And it's interesting because Bob's going to tell us more as St. Paul began. So let me give you your microphone back and invite you on up. So thanks, Bob. I'm very excited to learn more about St. Paul.
Well, it's, for those of you online and those of you who don't know me, I'm Bob Matthews. I'm officially an old timer. And there are some advantages to being an old timer. Not many, but the one is that I get to talk about things like this. And even I, though, had to do a bunch of research about what was St. Paul and what has it become and so on. Who knows when St. Paul started as a congregation? What year? 1891. What's interesting about this is that not only St. Paul started as a congregation in 1891, but that year, St. Paul and about a half a dozen other congregations in Colorado and Wyoming met in Colorado Springs. Must have been quite a trip from here to there. And they met in Colorado Springs and formed the Rocky Mountain Synod. So the Rocky Mountain Synod predates a bunch of religious or Lutheran organizations. Oh, by the way, in the ELCA merger, the one you couldn't think of was the AELC, the Association of Evangelical Lutheran Churches, which was the former English district of the Missouri Synod. And there's a long story about that I won't go into.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. So the church started in 1891, St. Paul did. Services were in German. It was a German congregation. That lasted for quite a while, but they finally decided to give up on German because there were fewer and fewer people from Germany that were living in Albuquerque. And so they went to English services, but it was a struggle. Several times they decided to close it up and give up on the idea of Lutherans in New Mexico. But they didn't do it. And by 1905, they finally managed to scrape together enough money and other things that they could actually have their own place. And so they had a church at the corner, near the corner of 3rd Street and Copper. Yeah. So there's this place at 3rd and Copper. Well, think about 3rd and Copper. There's the Galleria Shopping Center office building on one corner and the Hotel Andaluz on the other. It's pretty pricey property nowadays, but then it was just a semi-residential area, and that's where their building was. Well, in 1906, they moved, and therein lies a story. It seems that in 1906, the Lutheran Church, and there was another business in that same block on 3rd Street, complained to the city fathers that everybody else on the block was a brothel. And it was true. That was the red light district of Albuquerque. And so there was actually an ordinance on the books that said you couldn't have a house of ill repute within a certain number of feet of a church. And so the city was about ready to close down all the brothels. At this point, a woman named Lizzie McGrath stepped in. She was the most prosperous of all of the madams on 3rd Street. And she came to the church and said, "I'll give you $3,000 if you move." Well, went to an inflation calculator, and they don't have data before 1914, but the estimate is that $3,000 then would be worth about $100,000 now. So it was the church didn't have to think very much about that. And they accepted the gift and moved. I don't know what happened to all of the neighbors, but they proceeded along doing their own business. So in 1906, the church moved to 6th and Silver, which is kind of the golden age, the Holy Land of St. Paul, because they were there until 1971 when we moved into this building. So it was a good long time. We went through a lot of changes, a lot of expansion. I've got in my hand here some cards that show the chapel in 1960 or so, a new educational building was built at 6th and Silver, and in it was a chapel. And there's a picture of the inside of that chapel there. My brother was married in there, and I was baptized in there, and so on and so forth. Then the church grew magnificently. They were, by the 60s, they were having 600 people attend worship every week, 300 kids in Sunday school. The blue one. Thank you very much. That's better. So, but something else happened in the middle there that I skipped over. In 1948, things were going pretty well for the churches. It was after World War II, and it was the beginning. I was born in 1948. It was the beginning of the baby boom. Churches were full, and Albuquerque was filling up. Sandia Laboratories became a separate entity and started hiring. The city was growing to the east. And there was a decision made to set up another congregation in Albuquerque. And St. Paul's part of that was to send a delegation of 50 members to become the new congregation. And so that was the beginning of St. Timothy Lutheran Church. It's a different way of doing mission congregations, but it seems to have worked. They're still there. So in 1966, St. Paul decided that the place at 6th and Silver, which had a big place in everyone's hearts, it was just getting too small. Not that the building itself was so small, it's just there wasn't any place to park. We could tell that the growth of the city was not in the downtown area, and so the decision was made to go to this place at the corner of I-25 and I-40, which would be, it was assumed, the center of the new city. It was not known back then that it was impossible to get from I-25 and I-40 to here, and that the city would grow in a different direction. But at the time, that's the way it was decided, and we hired an architect and started working on getting a building built.
I forgot about the fire. I was gonna say
Well, in 1966, the process started, and it chugged along as church processes always do on its own speed. But then on Palm Sunday evening of 1968, the church caught fire, and the sanctuary was destroyed, but the education building remained. And so the congregation moved into that building, had all their services and everything in there, and then for sure we needed a new place. And so everything went into high gear, and in 1971 we moved into this building. Now, there are still a whole bunch of people that you will meet around St. Paul that remember 6th and Silver fondly. And there are a bunch of families who started there who are still with us. The Kramers is a name that you probably recognize. They're a large family from St. Paul and representatives, descendants of who still are with us. Barbara Maxwell was born into the Kramers, and she started at St. Paul in 1927. So there's a link there across a vast amount of time. Yeah, and she loves to tell stories. So there's a bunch of others, the Shirleys. Julie Ambrogi was born into the Shirleys. There's the Matthewses, and so on. There are a number of families that are still around. Ash, and the Burnett's. So there's these family ties that go across along with all the rest of it, the architectural and the theological and everything, but also family. And that's probably, well, it's part of why community is so important to St. Paul now. And it really defines the kind of congregation that we are. So that's enough of facts and figures. What do you want to talk about?
So I'll start us a little bit. We don't have to go this direction, but I think, certainly I'm totally a newbie, and we have a few. Mary Grace, when did you?
6 years.
So you came like kind of just before, a couple of years before I came, and so we have some of these newbies, and I've felt that rumbling even before COVID, but now that COVID hit, it's like that really put was hard. So everyone, and when I hear a lot of stories are with those connections are coming back to the Larry Wright and the 70s, 80s, when it was just like a heyday here, right? This place was filled, 3 services. Easter you probably had to come like half hour early, and the chairs. And so it's not just us at St. Paul that this has happened to. But what's going on now between I don't know, even since 2000 for us at St. Paul, and what's thrusting us forward with you all? I mean, how do we start moving forward, or keep moving forward? We haven't been a standstill. We're certainly became reconciling in Christ. What year was that? When did we become reconciling in Christ? That was a big old long process.
After that whole month,
Yeah,
that we finally agreed to it.
Yeah.
So it's
90s.
yeah. So that's a big decision.
Mid-2000.
Okay.
So for those of you who have had a hard time hearing, especially those of you online, the question is, so what's been happening lately, especially since 2000 here at St. Paul, that's providing impetus? And that's a good question. So one of the markers there since 2000 was becoming a reconciling in Christ congregation, where we open ourselves completely to LGBT members and friends and staff. So yeah, what's been going on that's pushing the congregation forward, or at least in some direction?
Well, I feel like we watched that video, and it's all about forward movement. And when change this has continued to happen, and when schisms break off, it's because one group wants to stay where they are, and the other group wants to move forward. And I think we're part, the ELCA, and St. Paul has always been the group that's moving forward. And I mean, we have to always work against that wanting to stay where we are, or how we are, stay where we're comfortable or whatever. So, but I think moving forward, is that difficult ground of where do we need to be next? Where are we being called to be?
Yeah, and we've seen it in the history of the congregation. It's time to make a move. And, you know, you can never tell what it's going to be when you get there, but you got to start moving.
Well, something that I've always felt about St. Paul's from when I was here, prior, I feel that we've always been not just forward moving, but trying to walk the walk. The partnerships in the community, the work that Kay's done. That was going on when I was here before in the late 80s. But all the partnerships we have with Interfaith and FaithWorks, and I don't even remember all the names, but there's a real commitment there to the community and to affecting change in the society around us. I even think back just a few weeks back when Kurt from Lutheran Advocacy and the session was going on with the legislature. They were trying to wrap up, and there was all these committed people who were determined to get those issues heard and voted on before they went into recess. And that speaks a lot.
Yeah, I should say that personal anecdote, I guess, semi-personal. There's always been what we call social ministry at St. Paul. And back in the mid to late 60s, the Social Ministry Committee became aware that suicide was a big problem in Albuquerque and getting worse. And the question was what to do about it. So they got together with a bunch of other people that were interested in that, professionals, other volunteers, and so on, and formed the Albuquerque Suicide Prevention Center, which was completely staffed by volunteers at the time. And so St. Paul was heavily involved as volunteers who would answer the phone when somebody was in crisis. It has since developed into a much more institutional arrangement, and UNM Health Sciences Center runs it now. But it started in the conference room down yonder, or the equivalent at 6th and Silver. But we're still at it. Calico, there's another one. I guess Penny and Omar left, but Penny Durant had been interested in early childhood education for a long time and realized that there was a need for high quality childcare. And we just happened to have some classrooms that weren't being used all week, and it seemed like a possibility, at least, and for 20 years it has been. Yeah, friends feeding friends. We could start telling stories all day. One of the associate pastors here, back in the 70s and 80s, was a man named Daniel Erlander, who he had this insight. He said, the problem with America and with Christians in general is we're materialistic. And it's much too easy for us to decide that we can buy something or acquire something to make us feel better. They say, this is destroying us. I propose that we have a Materialists Anonymous, where if you feel like you want to buy something, you call up your friend and they talk you out of it.
So Dan.
Well, that turned into a group called Journey, which met regularly, and to consider the whole issue of how faith intersects with life in now. And it was an amazing thing. And one of the things that came out of, well, somebody said, well, we ought to do something instead of just sitting around talking about it. And so we decided to host a meal at Salvation Army for homeless people. And that morphed, a bunch of other congregations got involved, and it morphed into Friends Feeding Friends, which still goes on today. So that's only been 40 years.
The adopted families has been around
Yeah.
for decades now.
Yeah. Kay Shenifal decided that there was a need for household furnishings and supplies and things for people who were too poor to afford them, and so that's what we got. And it's still going.
And the church did not support Kay when she started that ministry.
I was just gonna say, I know there's some.
Yet she said, I'm gonna do it anyway. And I mean, that's what I'm talking about, of staying in your comfort zone or moving forward. And yeah, I mean, now it's part of us, but.
Well, there's still some residual stuff there, I think. And I would name that this is, since I have come here, that this is one of those things that we just haven't quite tackled. I think when we first came, there was a real challenge with getting different relationship with Calico, right? There were some tensions there when I came, and over the time, and then so that was an intentional thing that we worked on that, and we changed actually the language in our constitution to say that it's a ministry of St. Paul and not an organization of. And then, it could change down the road too, but right now, this is where we're at. It's about like trying to have those relationships. With adopted families, it's a similar kind of thing. There's some things that we need to, I think, wrap ourselves around, because right now they're technically sharing our 501c3 status, but there's no reckoning with account. So stuff is a pass-through for us, and it goes to adopted families, and I don't distrust anything at all. But, I've had some conversations with Kay, and that's just one aspect of, I think, residual from that not fully wrapping it in. And I don't think, is it listed in our constitution?
No.
So I think there's some.
But I mean, it
there's
is
some
felt
it
now
is.
to be
It
one
is.
of our ministries.
Yeah,
It's
and
really
so
been
I
raised.
think we need to wrap our wording around that too. So that's another thing, maybe that I will pick that bandwagon up. We have a lot going on.
Rather than repeat all of that for the people who couldn't hear, the question is, how do we go from somebody has a brilliant idea about ministry that we can do, and how does that become a ministry of the church as a whole? And there's a lot of issues to work through on all of that, and so that still is in the case of adopted families, that's a big issue. In all of our ministries, though, it's a point. You want?
We certainly need to mention Titus and Charlotte Scholl. First, they started the storehouse, and after they retired and went off to a ranch for a year, they came back and started what has become Roadrunner Food Bank. Titus, when he started, just saw household goods being tossed out, and he knew they could be put to better use. That was the primary emphasis of the storehouse when it started. And I wonder if Kay's response with adopted families came about to balance, as the storehouse, there was not a need for food back when Titus started. Their food output was very small. But then it's a balance. The food need went up, the space had to be used, the clothing and household items went down, and so they may be two parts of a whole. And it's hard to see that right when it's happening.
that's as good a place as any to wrap this up. The question is, in 1891, there was this little German-speaking congregation that started in Albuquerque and was doing whatever it was that they were doing. Compare that to what's going on here, or what was happening any time else in the history of the congregation. There's just no way to tell. The Spirit blows where it listeth. But the important thing is the faith, the loyalty of the people who still gather around St. Paul. And so that's probably as good a lesson to learn from all of this as there is.
Should we close with prayer? It seems like appropriate. We're talking about the Spirit in our whole history. So the Lord be with you. Let's pray. Gracious God, you continue to work through your church since its inception. And we know that you work in incredible and big ways, possibly even outside the church. We give you thanks that you call us to take what we learn and are nurtured with here in this building and take it out into the world where we all desperately need to hear of your love and to know that we belong. So may we be strengthened with our worship today and with your meal, as well as this education time together. Send us forth and bring us back each week. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Thanks, everyone. So it's been confirmed. I thought I had heard that there was like a third location at some point. So that was the one, third and Auburn. Yeah.
What building is there?
I think so.